The next. Oh, correct.
A jazz standard from the 1940s called Stardust. It's actually a ballad. In jazz, the main rhythms that we play are basically called swing. That is, I mean, some people use the term loosely, but swing is usually this something you have to develop based on listening to the music over and over again. Really develop that sense of timing. This is Charlie Parker classic.
Many jazz players, after like a while of playing, they try to create their own version of how they play, like their own style. Do you have that? Have you?
I think I do have that. It definitely develops and changes over time. Like I've listened to musicians play from wow. I mean, over the course of like 5 or 6 years, and it sound completely changes. I mean, they sound like the people they listen to early in their career, and then give them a couple of years, and they really develop their own sound. Yeah.
I teach harmony primarily. I play I play the bass, and then all of my teaching is on piano.
Oh, okay.
Is it related to styles of music?
Yeah.
So
like
in the ensembles here, they're all the stuff that I'm doing is rock and funk music. When I'm teaching here, it could be anything. It could be Beethoven. Most of the time, it's 20th century American music. So it could be, I use like I don't know Stevie Wonder, clock, Duke Ellington, clock. I don't know if that helps. Jazz.
Jazz, you play jazz?
What's nice about Berklee is that the objective seems to be to help students understand what you need to do to be a successful musician. And the way that the curriculum is designed, you're really put through, there's a big journey from like entering in Berklee and getting through all of the core things. That journey requires you to know how a lot of that music actually works. And so even though like I wouldn't necessarily play a Woody Guthrie song in a harmony class, there's no reason why I couldn't play that. And actually I probably will now because there's some of those tunes will really be helpful for some of the kids that are
with the
relationship between
yeah.
jazz. Well, jazz is a folk music,
Yeah.
and so I guess the question would really be the other direction for me. What do you think folk music is? If you're saying that folk music is the American tradition of the singer-songwriter with guitars, that thing, they come from the same place, but you have to go back into the 19th century to find that spot where they come from, and then you have to work out from there. And you say that folk music is any kind of like indigenous ethnic music, anything that happens among like common people in the whole world, and jazz is also one of those things. They're all related maybe through the human experience more than anything else. So that makes it related to like Hindustani music or to I don't know, Ethiopian pop music or something like that. It's the American folk music.
Yes.
And so you have to go back into the 19th century to find how they connect. But they do connect. They connect through the folk songs that come from Europe, and they connect from
The ragtime
like
and the
African tribal traditions. Ragtime is a really important connection, and also country blues. So yes, so the relationship, to answer your question, what's the relationship between folk music and jazz, is found in all of those places in the sort of late 18th to 19th century. Things about how cultures relate to one another, the smashing together of African cultures and European cultures. Look at a place like Congo Square in New Orleans, where
It was the place where I was born, jazz.
yeah, it's true.
So,
I mean, really. And so you'll find
all
things
this
there.
clashing.
If you're looking for more of like a musicological answer to that question, like what are the musical components? The things have to do with self-expression. You know, you find even in Bill Monroe that he's got a very personal way of telling the story. Or Woody Guthrie, when you listen to Woody Guthrie singing and playing, it's a very personal way of telling that story. And in jazz, it's the same thing. So if Bill Monroe and Woody Guthrie and Louis Armstrong all do the same song, they're going to sound completely different. So self-expression is a really
Creating our own style,
which is also one of the core components of America. So it's sort of, in a certain way, like Wynton Marsalis says that jazz is the only kind of music that it's the kind of music that comes closest to accomplishing America's stated ideals. So in that way, you find a link also.
connection.
Folk music is kind of, in a way, harmonically, it's inherently less intricate than other kinds of music. So those who come in knowing that kind of music still have a long way to go, but it's just it makes me sad.
Folk music in America would definitely be jazz. It definitely is. There are other folk music in this nation, but jazz is one of the biggest, I would say. I mean, it started with what is a classic example of a mixture of cultures. I mean, you had the New Orleans people, you had the ragtime, the blues, you had different people coming together to make that music and developed into jazz over some time. Yeah. So I definitely consider jazz being.
The thing about David Liebman is that his generation is one that was extremely curious about, that's it, curious, period. And so jazz musicians in the 50s and the early part of the 60s had a really limited scope. We didn't have the internet, right?
Yeah.
So we could only do whatever we had access to. David Liebman's generation, he's from the later part of the 60s into the 70s. Now all of a sudden they could travel more. It was easier to go to Europe, easier to go to Brazil or something like that, or Africa. Recordings were more easily available of things from all over the world. And so his generation was kind of the first one to really start thinking about bringing everything together. He's fascinating because he'll have records of focusing on West African drum traditions and how that might relate to jazz. There are a few other kinds of folk music that I can think of with him, but what he's amazing at having done is bring these things together in a kind of way, number one, and then number two, to have a vision for like what are all the possibilities that I need to be aware of in order to be able to create music, and then how can I have mastery over all those possibilities. If you can imagine infinity, and it's a lot of possibilities.
Yeah.
And he's done a really exceptional job of thinking about how to carve out part of infinity and make it functional for saxophone players. Basically, every instrument has that kind of person. So if there's a bass player who does that, there's a piano player who does that.
Yes, I also play the soprano saxophone.
And like, what's the difference?
The soprano saxophone is almost half the size. It is completely vertical. It doesn't have a
Like curving.
it doesn't have a curve at the end of it. It's a much higher, it's a higher pitched instrument basically. It very different in terms of playing as a saxophonist. It sounds completely different, and it's very difficult to play. You have to really learn to master it. Yeah. So we have different exercises to warm up the embouchure or your muscles that you use to play the instrument. And yeah, if you were to play without warming them up, very often you would get fatigued really easily. It could even become painful. So yeah, we try to warm up before playing. The types of jazz I play are much older, and I also play some Caribbean folk music, which is about the same age, if not older. And yes, I play some older forms of music. Yeah. Yeah. So Caribbean folk music I play is called calypso. It's a very old form of music. Yeah.